Hi and welcome to WEH Videos. My name is Skip and this is part 3 in my series for beginners in learning to fly in X-Plane 11. In this video we are going to continue from where we left off in part 2. We will taxi to the run-up area and finish our pre-flight, and then we'll do a quick flight in the pattern for runway 33 at Benton Field. Now we left off with the engines running, so let's continue our checklist. We finished our engine start last time and we checked the oil pressure and it's in the green down here. And now we're ready for our before taxi checklist. Move it over here a little bit. Lights is required. We're only required to have the beacon on here. So let's get the beacon on. Flaps are up, so let's check the flaps are up. Avionics master on. That's right here. We're going to turn the avionics master on. And wow, we're getting ready to go here. Radio check. So now we're going to put our headsets on, and if I have a passenger, I'm going to be talking to him, and I just may go ahead and call the Unicom folks and ask for a radio check. So I'm just going to check with my passenger, and he says, yeah, I can hear you, so that's great. We're going to set the transponder to standby. So let's turn the transponder on. And we're on standby. Now we want to set this to 1200. This tells air traffic controllers that we are flying on visual flight rules, and we'll go over that a bit. So we want to have our transponder set to 1200 on the standby mode. Well, what do we need to do next? All right, next we want to do a brake check. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move forward a little bit, and we're going to step on the right brake and the left brake. And okay, it looks like our brakes are working. And now, my friends, finally, we're ready to taxi over to do our pre-takeoff check. So let me show you what we're going to do here. I'm going to jump outside and we're going to sneak up here and get a bird's eye view. All right, so here we are right here. We are going to follow the taxi lines down here, and we're going to go to an area right here. Now at Benton Field there's actually a little bump out area right here, and it's the run-up area, so we'll just stop right over here and we will do our run-up. We'll do the run-up and then we'll get over here to runway 33 and we're going to take off. So here we go. So how exactly do you taxi, you might ask? Well, for you guys who've never flown before, if we look down at the rudder pedals, you see they move back and forth. And this actually is how we steer the airplane on the ground. If I push the left rudder pedal forward, the airplane is going to turn to the left, and the right is going to turn it to the right. Turning the yoke will do absolutely nothing. And believe me, when I first got in an airplane and I went to make a left turn, I turned the yoke and absolutely nothing happened. So we steer with our feet. Here we go. Now we're going to follow this taxi line over here, and we're going to go down to a run-up area. And since there is no run-up area here, we're just going to have to invent one. So now another important thing you need to know about flying is you need to keep your eyes outside the airplane. One thing that is really common for us simmers is we get caught up with the instruments, and we're always looking at the instruments. And that's not a good thing. You want to keep your eyes outside. The other thing we want to do here while we're taxiing is keep that yellow line in the center of our airplane. We want to be staying on that line. And I find it very difficult to do in the simulator. I think this is one of the hardest parts about the simulator, and I find it quite frustrating to keep the airplane centered. I tend to bounce all over like this, and I'm actually having a really hard time controlling the speed and everything here today. But that's just a simulator for you. So we're going to go over here by this truck. and turn around. So we're just going to call this the run-up area because we don't have one. And we're just going to spin around. Now I'm applying a left brake and left rudder. All right, so we want to be facing the wind a little bit. So let's put the brake on here and see what we have to do next for our pre-flight. All right, our pre-takeoff check is we're going to look at the controls. So what we're going to do is we are going to look out here and we are going to turn our yoke, and we're watching the elevator and make sure that it's actually responding. And let's go over to the other side and make sure that's working. Then we want to spin around and we're going to check the elevator, make sure it's working, and then as long as we're there, we're going to look at the rudder and we can see that that's working also. I'm stepping on the left brake pedal and the right brake pedal, pushing them forward. The pedals, let's go back to the pedals for a second here. The toe up here is the brake. So when you push on the top, that's the brake, and you push back and forth on the bottom, that is the rudders. The top is the toe brake for the wheels, and the bottom part is where you're going to push for the rudders. Now we want to check our instruments, and we're going to start with the compass. We look at our compass, and then we want to make sure that our heading indicator matches that setting. The heading indicator can drift a bit, and we adjust that down here by turning this knob and making sure that they match. Next, we want to look at our altimeter and make sure that's correct. You can do that by dialing in the airport elevation. We know that Benton Field is 723 feet. So we're going to just dial that in there too. We also, remember, if we went to our map and under Benton Field, when we clicked on detail, it gave us the 2992 pressure reading. So we could just dial that in. It's hard to read. That would be indicated right here. All right, next we run the throttle up to 1700 RPM on the engine. We're going to check the magneto, the carb heat, the vacuum, oil temperature and pressure, and then we'll bring the throttle back down to 1000. Now, this is not easy to do, so I'm not going to work too hard at it, but basically what you have is a switch here. This is where you start the engine, and it has a left and a right. The engine on the Cessna 172 has 2 spark plugs per cylinder, and they are fired by magnetos. And you have a left magneto and a right magneto, and it runs on both magnetos all the time. So what you're doing here is when we're switching this is we're turning off one of the magnetos. What will happen is we'll get a little drop in the RPM, and then we turn it back to both, and then we turn it to the other one to make sure we get a drop to make sure that both magnetos are firing. And I'm not going to do that. It's hard to do here. Every time I try it, it doesn't work too well in the simulator. So we're up to 1,700 RPMs. We're looking at the vacuum. What else are we looking at? Oil pressure and temperature, and they're looking good. And now we're going to bring the RPM back down to 1,000. And finally, we're going to check the amp meter, and we can do this by just lowering the flaps and watching the needle. It should wiggle a little bit. Yeah, okay, so we got a little wiggle there, so we know the amp meter is okay. And now we're ready to taxi over to the runway and take off. So we release the brakes, give it full left rudder, step on the brake a little bit to help it turn nicely, and now we're going to taxi over to runway 33 and do our final check before we take off. I really don't like the way this thing is taxiing. Anyway, here we are, and we're going to stop short of runway 33 over here. And we have one more thing to do here before we can take off. And before we take off, we're going to make sure that our seat belts are on. that the doors and the windows are latched. We got the flaps in the up position. We have our trim set. We haven't talked about the trim much lately, but here's a little trim tab here, and right here, it's hard to see, is the trim wheel. And when we rotate that wheel, that little trim tab is going to move up and down, and we're going to set the trim right there for takeoff. So we have flaps up, trim set, mixture full rich, carb heat is off. We're ready to go. All right, we're ready to take off, but just as a reminder, let's look at some things here. Benton Field, we have a CTAF Unicom frequency of 112.8, which we have set on our radio. And this is a common traffic advisory frequency, or a universal communication station. We also want to remember that we're at an elevation of 723. We got a traffic pattern then of 1,723 feet. And for runway 33, we have a left traffic pattern. So we want to know that. And then the other thing we want to know is our climb out speed. So let's take a look at this. Just to remind us again, we have a takeoff and normal climb out 70 to 80 knots. So we wanted 75, 80 knots, it would be fine. And we're ready to go now. Well, we're not exactly ready. I missed the transponder in the checklist. I'm sorry, but these things happen. So we got the transponder now set to altitude. And we've got our Unicom frequency set. We're going to take a look out to the left and over to the right to make sure nobody's landing, somebody who hasn't announced their arrival or anything. And we've listened on the radio. We haven't heard anybody, so now it's our turn to call and let folks know what we're doing. And it goes like this. Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima departing Benton Field, runway 33 will stay in a pattern, 33 Benton. We always repeat the runway at the end, so if somebody's coming in and they didn't get the beginning of our call, at least they know that we're on 33, so they'll be looking for us somewhere around 33 and they know the pattern we're in. Now remember, we have a left traffic pattern here. That means that we're going to be making left turns. So we're on the center line now. We're going to add full power. Remember our rotation speed, 55 knots. We're going to pull back in the yoke a bit, lift off, and now we're going to fly out on the 330 heading until we get to 500 feet above the surface, which is normal, but here in Redding, they want us to cross over the river over here, so we got to keep going until we cross the river. Now I'm going to trim down just a little bit, bring that nose down to get that speed up to around 80 knots. Here's the river over here that we need to cross over before we can make our first turn in our pattern. Traffic patterns are kind of like a racetrack around the airport. And the first leg is going to be a crosswind. The first turn is going to be a crosswind. So we're looking for the lake. All right, there's the lake right there. We're going to make our turn and we will announce Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima, turning crosswind 33 Benton. Always repeat the runway. So now we're at traffic pattern altitude. We're going to level off here. And we keep turning until we are on a heading of 240. When we look over here, and now we see the airport right here. We want to get about a half a mile out and make another turn for our downwind leg. And this is looking pretty good. We'll announce Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima, turning downwind 33 Benton. So other pilots will know where to look for us as we are turning downwind. They'll know exactly where we are. And here we go. And now we're heading on a heading of 150. And when we get to midfield, we are going to start our descent. So now we're cruising along. And let's see, where's the runway? Well, It's right here. Here's the end of the runway, so we can start our descent here pretty quick. We're still at pattern altitude. We're looking good. Still on a heading of 150. All right, let's go. We put the carb heat on, and we'll start our descent. We'll drop our RPMs. We'll put some flaps down here a little bit. And what I like to do is put in some flaps, set the RPM to 1,500, and then I'm just going to trim the airplane for 500 feet per minute. And this will get us right around 70 knots, and I shouldn't have to do anything anymore until we're ready to land. Now what we're going to do is when the runway is at about a 45-degree angle behind us, we're going to make another turn, and this is going to be our base turn. So everything's looking good. I haven't touched the throttle or anything, and I'm thinking that looks pretty good. Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima, turning base, 33 Benton. So now we're making our turn for the base leg, and then we'll make our turn to final. And we'll just keep turning. And we'll look over there. There's the runway. We'll be coming up for our final here pretty quick. Haven't touched the throttle or anything. Everything's looking good speed-wise. And we'll make our announcement. Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima, turning final, 33 Benton. Let's take a look over here, make sure we're coming in right. Oh, that's looking pretty good. So now you see those lights there, right here. These are PAPI lights, and that's telling us that we're a little high. Red over white means that we're all right. So now we're looking really good. We want to slow to around 60 knots, go to full flaps on the final. And now we're going to keep this part of the runway right here in the windshield. We're just going to keep that right there. And if we keep it in that same spot, it's going to take us right down to the runway. I'm getting a little low, so I'm going to pull up just a little bit here. I know I'm going to make the runway. I'm going to kill the power here, and now we're going to come in and then slowly bring the nose up. Keep that nose up. Keep that nose up, and touchdown. Bring the nose down slowly, and we're right on the center line. And there you have it. We have made our first flight in this series. This has been a introductory flight, and let's just taxi over and park this thing, and I'll tell you a few more things. All right, that was a little quick there on that turn. Okay, but once we exit the runway, we let people know. So now we're going to get on the radio, and we're going to say, Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima, clear runway 33. That lets people know we're off the runway. We're going to come down here. We're going to bring the flaps up. We're going to put the transponder to standby, turn the carb heat off, and let's go park. And our parking spot is right over here. So let's go ahead and shut down, and yes, there's a procedure for that. We've done our after landing, and now we're going to do the engine shutdown. First is avionics master off. Turn the avionics off. That's obviously the power for all our electronics. Next it says all electrical equipment off, so let's just turn the beacon off. That's the only electrical stuff we had on. And we're going to pull the mixture all the way to the off position. So let's go down here. We're going to pull this all the way back, and that's going to kill the engine. And then there's a couple of other little things to do, but we're not going to bother with that. The Hobbs control and those things, we can talk about those later. Well, I've covered a lot of information in a very short time in this video, and I'm sure some of you have questions, or even lots of questions. So please put your questions in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get you an answer. Our next flight will be in the pattern again here at Benton Field, but this time I'll pick it apart, so to speak. I'm going to stop along the way at different points in the flight and explain what's going on and why we're doing certain things. So now in the next video, I think I should go over some controllers and things you could use for your simulator to make your flying experience more realistic, and also show you some X-plane setup ideas, things that I do that help, at least with flying in the Cessna. And lastly, if you want the Airport Benton Field 085, you can download it for free, and here is the address for that. And I'll also put this in the comment section below. So there you have it, our first introductory flight. If you like this, please click the like button. If you have questions or just want to leave a comment, have something to say, please do so. You can always send me a message. I'm happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless.